Good evening and welcome to Third Thursday. I'm Paul Amos, founder of The Redeemed. The Redeemed is a community of men of all backgrounds who've come together to discuss life's difficulties as well as our triumphs over those difficulties. Today we're blessed to have with us Greg Bainter. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Greg, want to begin where we do with all of our guests and ask you, what does redemption mean to you?
It's a great question. It's interesting that you bring that up because I was just reading some scriptures yesterday and I was thinking about redemption. And I think that for me, God is the God of second chances. God is the God of redemption. God is the God who can redeem the time. At my age, I feel like there's a whole lot of history going back that I wish I could have changed, that I could have made different and made different choices. And I'll have a story about that maybe a little later, but God says that it's never too late and he can take anything and change it and make something good out of it. So that's what redemption means to me.
I love the God is the God of the second chances. It is so true. In my own journey, and as I know as you're going to talk a little bit about yours, in my own journey, second chances have been critical because I certainly have made a mess of the things that happened in my life. And I'm thrilled to know that God gives us that chance at redemption and that he sees us as redeemed even before we lay out all the things that have happened in our lives and ask him for that. He's already done it for us. Absolutely. Well, if you wouldn't mind, Greg, we'd love to hear about your story. Tell us a little bit about how you came to be here today and just lead us down the journey that has ultimately led you to the place you are today.
Well, boy, there's a lot of stuff there, so I'll try to make it a little bit shorter. I got a lot in my age at 62. I've got a lot of history, so it's interesting because I met the Lord. I didn't grow up in a Christian home, and I met the Lord when I was 16, and that was like the beginning of really a journey towards redemption. I struggled most of my life with same-sex attraction. That was the biggest elephant in my room growing up. And for most of my formative years, that was a big secret. And finally came to light when I met the Lord at 16. And I had a really precious aunt who led me to the Lord. And she was the first person that I ever told about my SSA struggle. And, I was so deathly afraid that she was going to be shocked and horrified. And when I shared with her what my struggle was, she smiled and her first words were, "Praise the Lord." And the reason why she reacted that way is because she saw that she knew God can do something with that and God could do something in me. And so for me to confess that was a really good thing. So do you want me to go ahead and just continue on my testimony?
Yeah, well, no, I think that's great. I think that, I appreciate you sharing a little bit about the fact that you have same-sex attraction and just tell us from here, kind of a little bit about the journey that led you to, addiction and a little bit about the journey of how you've begun to overcome that.
Okay. Well, when I met the Lord at 16, I had felt some freedom for the first time in my life. I just knew that God was really the answer. When I accepted him, he became real. And I thought, wow, I've been looking for this my whole life. And as a teenager, I tried to mask the pain and the shame that I was dealing with through alcohol and drugs. And those weren't giving me really anything that made a difference in my life. It just compounded and made the shame and the guilt and the self-hatred a lot worse. So I met the Lord and I walked with him for about 6-7 months and things were good. And I felt like, okay, this is going to be the answer for me. And I think at that point, I was still confused in a lot of ways, and the enemy can come in and hit you at your weakest point. So I think 6 months after I met the Lord, somebody came into my life, another guy who struggled with same-sex attraction, and we became friends. And before I knew it, we had started having a sinful emotional and sexual relationship, and that lasted for about 4 years. So by the time I was 21, and I can distinctly remember me telling God, I know this is wrong, but I feel like I can't help myself and I'm going to walk down that path anyway. So it was a conscious intentionality about walking away from God, turning my back on him. And so that lasted about 4 years. Thought I had found the answer as far as the emotional needs in my life and what I was looking for. God was always in the background. God was still there, but I had kind of put him in the background. And the neat thing about God is that, I believe the scripture that says that the things that God has started in your life, he will complete. And God let me go for these 4 years. And the way he brought me back to him is that he brought that other guy that I was involved with to salvation. That person had not been raised in a Christian home either and had no experience with Jesus. But through some circumstances and events in his life, he became a Christian. And he's the one that came to me and said, this is wrong. We got to stop this because this isn't what God wants. So God used that circumstances to bring me back to him. And it was very painful. It was very difficult. But I got to the lowest of lowest places again. Felt like, okay, God, you never let go of me. You were there the entire time. You knew what you were doing and you knew what I needed. So I recommitted to my life to God at 21. And I had moved out of the area from where I was. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so I knew I needed to kind of get out of some life circumstances and some things that weren't good. So I moved 100 miles to Sacramento, California. God had given me a place to live. And I had a car and I had a couple $100 in my pocket. And, God just knew what he was doing. And so, I got a job within a couple months, and then I had found a little church to start attending. And on the very first Sunday, 2 rows in front of me was the lady that was going to become my wife.
Wow.
And God just knows what he's doing. And so, I met her that first day, and within 2 or 3 weeks, I had this was a really small church, so they had like sharing time where it was very informal and people could get up and share things. And so I stood up and shared what God had done in my life and that what he was doing and then what I struggled with. And it was amazing. This church just embraced me. And I was, being 21, a group of young adults that were my age at that point, the end of the service came up and just surrounded me and included me. And that was one of the most healing experiences I think I had ever experienced. And my wife was part of that group. My future wife was part of that group. So within a few months, we had gotten to be really close friends as part of this group. And God just like turned a switch. And for the first time in my young life, I started having emotional and sexual feelings for the lady that was going to become my wife. Up to that point with my same-sex attraction struggle, I had never, ever had emotional feelings or any kind of a sexual attraction towards a female. And it was almost like God clicked a switch because he knew that that is the woman that he was going to bring to my life. And, within about 3 months from that point, we started dating. Within a few more months, we got engaged. And within a year, we got married. And it was an amazing thing. And everybody knew that it was a God thing. So it was just amazing that I could clearly see the hand of God in that. And we celebrated 40 years this last September of marriage.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I can clearly say that my wife makes me a better man, that I am complete and whole in her. And I can experience really the miracle of what marriage is supposed to be about from God's perspective and God's eyes. So, but it took 40 years or 37 years to get to the point where I could clearly see that. Our first 6 months of marriage was really good. Things were great. But there were things that were still needed to be dealt with in my life. In addition to the same-sex attraction, I discovered masturbation at a young age, probably 9 or 10 years old. It had become really an addictive thing in my life. And at this point, even though I was married and I was feeling fulfilled and I knew that's where I needed to be, masturbation was still an issue. And my wife knew my struggle before we got married, really about the same-sex attraction. We didn't really talk about masturbation too much. she knew that was probably a little part of it, but not to the extent that it was becoming and really had become an addiction in my life. So we went, within another year after getting married, we had our first child, and within 5 years, we had 3 kids. So, our life was busy. I was working, she was a stay-at-home mom. Life was crazy, but crazy in a wonderful way. But I still hadn't really dealt with, the addiction of masturbation. I really needed to discover the roots of the same-sex attraction. Although God had given me a level of freedom, those feelings and emotions were still there, and they were still kind of churning inside. And I knew that there was a time that I had to deal with it. And there were some dark days in the first 7, 8 years of our marriage where, I think that I quit sharing that struggle with my wife and telling her when I was struggling with, the emotions of it and the pull of it. And that was the worst thing I could have done. Because with any kind of addiction, one of the dangers and one of the things you do is you pull away and you isolate. And I think I had started to isolate from my wife. And that was a huge mistake on my part. In my late 20s, I think I was 27, 28, I decided I really needed to get some Christian counseling to try to sort that out as far as the same-sex attraction. So I saw a Christian counselor for about 5 or 6 months, and we dug deep and discovered the roots of what that same-sex attraction was. And it was really interesting because I was able to come to see it that it wasn't a sexual thing. It wasn't really sexual at all. It was some unmet needs in my life. Grew up, in a non-Christian home, but I had hardworking parents, and my parents ended up being married 62 years, a couple of years ago before my mom died. They loved each other. They loved us kids, but my dad and I didn't really become connected as when I was a little boy. I was artistic and I was musical and I was a very sensitive little kid. My dad lived and breathed sports. He loved sports, and it just wasn't something that I liked. And he tried to bring me into his world, and I just didn't want to be in that world. And my dad also worked 2 jobs, so he was gone most nights. So we just really didn't connect. And as a little boy, I perceived that as a rejection, that he rejected me. And through counseling, I was able to come to understand that that isn't true, that my dad loved me and in his own broken way did the best he could. But I perceived rejection, and in that perception, I didn't feel like I got the affirmation from my dad that I needed as a little boy.
Mhm.
I didn't get brought into the tribe of men that every little boy needs to have happen in their life, to identify with of what masculinity is and what maleness is. And so there was this deficit in my life. And so going through the counseling to discover that, and that was really the roots of my SSA, I experienced a lot of healing. I was able to forgive my dad because I had a lot of anger. I was able to forgive myself and forgive that little boy because I had a lot of self-anger and self-hatred. So that was a real defining moment in my life as far as discovering what the same-sex attraction was. And I should have kept counseling going because I needed to deal with the addictions in my life. And I didn't, I stopped. So masturbation still became, I think it supplanted the same-sex attraction as the biggest elephant in the room. And, I went a lot of years, a lot of decades where I was addicted. And, it wasn't until the year 2000 that pornography really became an addictive factor along with that, when we got, set up with the internet and it wasn't dial up. And I can remember, and my work schedule changed so that I was home alone. My wife would go to work about an hour later or before I did. I could come home for lunch. And so I can clearly remember the morning I was in front of the computer doing some odds and ends, and a thought came in my head: why don't you look up on the internet what you could find as far as pornography? And I had never ever thought about that before. It just never entered my mind. And I can remember that morning doing that. And it was like heroin to a drug addict. And so for the next 17 years, I became really, really heavily addicted to pornography, and also along with the masturbation, to the point where I would act out probably 4, 5, 6 days a week. If I had a day off during the week because I was working on a Saturday or something, I would binge in front of my computer probably for 3 or 4 hours.
Wow.
Pornography addiction is a time bandit. It steals your time and you don't even know it. And and you think you can handle it. I was thinking that I could compartmentalize all of those things in my life. I was a worship leader at church. So I compartmentalized, my worship leader role, my husband role, my father role, all of these things I could juggle and handle in my life. But I wasn't realizing that what was happening is that I was pulling away from people. I was isolating and I was withdrawing, which is a very common thing that happens with people that are in addiction, especially sexual addiction. It got to the point where I pulled away so much that my wife and I went 9 years with no emotional or physical intimacy. And we were friends. We had the same likes and the same things in common. So we ended up becoming roommates. And I used to joke to my wife over the last couple of years that I don't know why you didn't hit me over the head with a frying pan and confront me and kick me out of the house. And her answer was that she knew that there was something wrong and something was going on in my life, but she also had a promise from God. She knew that we were meant for one another, that God picked each other out for the other person. So she was a prayer warrior. She prayed for me. And
how wonderful to have someone in your life who can speak to that, who can be that prayer warrior for you, who can come through for 9 years. That is really an outstanding testimony of your wife.
Yeah, God knew that I needed somebody just like her, So I am extremely grateful that he put her in my life and that he enabled her to pray for me. And I think that I was feeling, more and more shame upon shame and guilt upon guilt. And I got to the point where I knew that I couldn't compartmentalize it all anymore. I couldn't juggle it all. And I was turning to alcohol to try to medicate the pain also. And I think it's interesting because people are saying, well, what is the underlying reasons that you're addicted? What are you trying to compensate for? What are you trying to medicate away? And I think even though I had discovered the roots of my same-sex attraction and received some healing there was a lot of wounds still in me, a lot of hurt that I had never really dealt with. And it was just that human desire to be affirmed and accepted and desired and wanted, and all of those needs that are not unique to me, that every human being has. And I think that was still the underlying emotional reasons why I was trying to find a way to medicate that pain away. And so addiction became something that just got out of control. And I think it was in September of 2018 that I got to the lowest point where I knew that I had to do something. And what God did is that I got this thought in my head that, what this is doing to you, but what is it doing to those in your life that you love? How is this affecting your wife? And honestly, and this is an embarrassing thing to say, but I think that's the first time in a whole lot of years that I really ever stopped to think about what it's doing to my wife. And I think that for those of us who are in addiction, we're very self-centered, we're so focused and we isolate, and it becomes all about us. And I think that was the key that God needed to really get into my heart, my life, and get me to the point where I'm ready to make a change, was to think about somebody other than myself. So one night, and it was the night before our 37th wedding anniversary, I just spilled my guts. We were sitting around watching TV, and I think I had a little bit of whiskey, and my wife had said to me, you need to stop that. Whatever you're doing there, it's too much. And so I just spilled my guts to my wife, burst out in tears and told her everything, about the masturbation addiction, about the pornography addiction, and that, through those addictions, the same-sex attraction had kind of reared its ugly head again. And so I just confessed it all to her, and I just cried. And I told her, I can't fix myself. I can't change it. I don't know if I can go on anymore. I felt like I was a fraud. I felt like I was a fake. And, my wife was very calm, and she did her best to console me, but she was terrified because she was afraid that I was going to make a decision to walk away from my marriage, walk away from God, and pursue, a gay lifestyle or whatever. And so that night, I couldn't sleep. All I could do was cry. So I went to my den and sat in my recliner, and I just cried all night. My wife was terrified. She was in our bedroom and she was terrified. So pretty bad timing to have that happen the night before our anniversary. So we got up the next day and we got ready for work, and we didn't really say anything to each other. And we both went to work. And earlier in the week, knowing that that was going to be our anniversary, I had ordered flowers to be delivered to her. Well, she got those flowers, but she said it was the worst day of her life. And she threw the flowers away. And she just said that she hopes she never gets those particular kinds of flowers again. I thought, oh man, Greg, you can just mess things up and add insult to injury in there. So, it was all I could do to concentrate at work. It was very difficult. So, but God knew what he was doing, and he started to get into my heart. And by the end of the day, I knew that I didn't want to walk away for, some basic reasons of I was settled in my life. I was comfortable. We had a good life. We had adult children at that point. I had grandchildren at that point. And for no other reasons, if anything, was that I was comfortable. I didn't want to leave. So when I came home, I told my wife that I didn't want to leave, and I couldn't promise anything that our relationship could necessarily get better, but I knew I didn't want to leave, and I knew that I was here and that I would try. Well, that was a big relief for her because she was deathly afraid that I was going to walk away. So we basically hugged and we talked and we prayed together. And the next day, or that later that night or the next day, I remembered saying to God, I can't fix myself. I can't change myself. And if you want to do something in my life, then you are going to have to do it. And God, I'm tired of playing church, tired of playing what being a Christian is supposed to be about. I want to know you intimately. I want to know you deeply. And so, God, if you can do anything in my life, then I want you to come in, and you got to do the work. You've got to come in and make a radical change in me. Well, that was all God needed. He needed me to get down to the very, very core of who I was, push everything aside, and realize that there was nothing that I could do on my own and that I needed him desperately. God can work with that. I think for any of us in our life, God can work with that. So he did, within a few days, I started to feel some joy. I started to feel some hope. And yeah, there was a lot of work to be done, but God was starting. And here is the amazing thing. Within probably 4 or 5 days, God started bringing back a love for my wife that had been pushed down for so many decades, literally. I had gotten to the point where I felt like I wasn't in love with her anymore. I wasn't attracted to her. That's because there was no room in me for that. It was because it was so filled up with all the mess. And God started bringing that back. And it was new and refreshing. And I started being attracted to her again. So we started, it was like a new honeymoon. And I took her out on dates. And then within probably another 4 or 5 days, so a full week or a little longer, we were able to become physically intimate again. And it was an amazing surprise for both of us because it was better than it had ever been in our entire marriage, better than that first 6 months, of our marriage. And the difference was I could completely focus on my wife and be engaged with her, and without all of the junk tugging at me and all of the unraveled, all of the mess that was there that I had given to the Lord. And so there wasn't that stuff in the way. There were no walls anymore between us. So it was an amazing thing. And God just blessed that and just let it blossom over the next several months. We were giddy. We were like giddy teenagers again. And that's redemption. And, I'm thinking, okay, God, you can change me. You can work on me. But on top of that, you're going to do this. I mean, it was just beyond my wildest amazing, um, amazing. I just couldn't fathom it that he was going to do that. So, and that's continued. Our marriage has just been in the last 3 years better than I could ever think. And that's where I can truly now say that my wife makes me a better man, that she completes me, she makes me whole in our relationship. And I, for the first time in, 37 years of marriage at that point, I could truly understand what God intended for marriage between a man and a woman. So it was a wonderful thing. And, I really grieved over the lost decades, and that God, I not only robbed myself of a full life, and a life, that was really focused on loving you and being that man that God you could use, and also being the husband and the father that I knew God called me to do. I grieved over that until my wife, I think, got tired of me whining about it, that she took her hands and put them on my cheek, and she looked at me and she said, she's not grieving over the lost time because of the fact that it's better now than it ever has been. And she wouldn't trade that for anything.
No.
And that just wrecked me. It wrecked me because, I mean, in our own human thinking, we're sad about those things, but that's how God redeems time. And I had a friend tell me one time during this time that, not that God wanted you to go through what you went through, or that it was his perfect plan for your life, but God makes all things new, and God can take broken things and have good things come out of them. So he looked at me and he said, if you were meant to go through this because it could touch one person, would you do it all over again? I'm like, no, I don't know about that. But that is the amazing thing about God, is that he can bring good things out of broken things and things that we mess up. And honestly, now God has birthed in me this passion to walk alongside other guys who are struggling and with SSA or just pornography and addictions, and just say, hey, I was the poster child for hopelessness, because I always felt like God can change this person, God can do this, but he's not going to do it in me. And I blamed myself. I was never mad at God. I blamed myself. And so I was like the poster child for hopelessness. And so I can tell people that are struggling and that feel hopeless. And I could say, I know exactly what you're thinking and feeling because I was there. And so that level of empathy and understanding, I wouldn't have had that if I hadn't struggled and went through what I went through. And, God gives us each a testimony for a purpose, that we can share about the wonder of God and about, God's redemption and his healing power. And so God just has birthed in me, this passion to share that with others. So, yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. I appreciate you sharing your journey from isolation and compartmentalization to God saving you and saving your marriage. It's powerful to hear that your wife has been such a steady and stalwart, person in your life. And it's amazing to hear the healing that's happened in your life. And so thank you for sharing that very intimate and powerful story. Maybe you could talk now a little bit about your transition into LiveFree, and a little bit about what it meant to you to join small groups and to be connected with small groups.
Sure. Well, when I started my recovery journey a little over 3 years ago, and I really call it an awakening because it was like an awakening for me. I didn't realize in the beginning that I was going to need help from other people. I did early on get some protection on my devices. I think it was Ever Accountable that I used, and my wife was my accountability person for about a year in the first year of my recovery. And that had its pitfalls. Later on, people said, you really don't want your spouse as your accountability person because of the emotion involved and things, although it worked out pretty well. And my wife was always very gracious and understanding, but I needed more than that. I was reading, I was praying a lot, I was talking to my wife and going on this new journey of recovery, but I knew I needed more. And I was still caught in this 3 or 4 week cycle of acting out, of struggling with sobriety. Like, God, I never went more than probably a month or two in my life of not acting out. And so how do I get beyond that? And so after about a year, I kept getting these pesky emails advertising LiveFree. And I think it was because LiveFree was partnered with Ever Accountable, and that's why they were coming to me. And I ignored the first 2 or 3 emails, and I thought, what is this? I don't know what this is. By the third or fourth email, I thought, okay, I'm going to look at this and see what it is. And I discovered it was a community, an online community of men, who are in this struggle to recover from pornography addiction, masturbation addiction, sexual addiction. And they were having this special that if you paid like $19.95 for a year, it's a discounted rate or something like that. So I went ahead and I did that. I thought, well, what do I got to lose? So I did that. And it was amazing what I discovered, that online, there was this community of, at that point, this was 2 years ago, probably 50 or 60 men at that point, maybe 100 of guys that were in this community. And you could share your story, you could be vulnerable. People would pipe up and comment on what you're sharing. They would pray for you, they would encourage you, they would challenge you. And for the first time in my life, it was like I experienced what community can really do for you. Having other guys praying for me, you just felt like you weren't alone. It wasn't just you on this battle. And I was going through a real battle. God was still fulfilling that promise of me asking to get to really know him. I felt like I was being sifted like wheat in a lot of ways. And so that community really became a group, a brotherhood of men who just really were there for me. Like, an example is about 3 or 4 months after being a part of LiveFree, I had to go on a business trip down to Southern California from Northern California for work. And I was going to be in a hotel for 2 nights. And that would be a deadly combination for me. And I had shared that on LiveFree a few days before I left, asking for prayers. Literally about 38 guys posted on my post or commented saying they're going to pray for me, specifically like on those days. Those 2 nights that I was in that hotel, I think I could tangibly feel the presence of those prayers, the presence of God, and that knowing that God was praying for me. So it was a victory. Needless to say, I didn't slip up, didn't fall. And it was really because of that community and those guys praying for me. And so the other thing that you can do through that community is you can chat with guys individually. So within a few months, I started chatting with guys individually and getting to know people. And this is all virtual because nobody lived in my area. So, there were people, I was on the West Coast, there were people on the East Coast, there were some people in England, there was a guy in Australia. And you start talking to these people and you start developing godly, healthy relationships with these people. And so within a few months, I really started to experience what it was like to be a tribe of men and experience the healing that could come from those kinds of relationships. I think most men, especially in Western culture, don't struggle with having good, close, intimate friends. And I was starting to experience what that would be like. And so I started racking up sobriety numbers pretty soon. Oh, and then also in the middle of that, I saw that LiveFree offered online small groups. And these are groups that meet, at a certain time each week, once a week. And there's 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 guys in that group. And it meets via Zoom and there's a leader. So I decided, okay, I'm going to join a group. So I did. And it was wonderful. These same guys every week, they're there, you're accountable to them. You can share your struggles. They can encourage you, they can challenge you. And between meetings, you can chat with these guys because there was a dedicated chat room just for the group guys. So that was in, I think, the end of January of 2020. So I've been in that same group and I've stayed in that group the entire time. So I'm almost going on, what is that? Almost 2 years. So, and it's been great. And within a few months after that, I started really racking up sobriety numbers. And I had gotten to the point, I think it was last June that I had reached 545 days of not acting out at all. And that was amazing. I never could experience or expect that I could experience that level of freedom. So God also had started giving me that desire to share with others what I had experienced and the freedom that I had experienced. And within a month or two of that, Carl Thomas, the leader of LiveFree, reached out to me and asked me about my sobriety, how I'm doing, where I'm at. Would I be interested in leading a small group? And I thought, I had actually started to think about that. So we waited for a few months and before the opportunity arose. And so there was an opportunity to take over an existing group that came up that I did. I did that last February, and a group that had been in operation for 4 or 5 months. And then and it was a group for guys who struggle with same-sex attraction. So I did that, and there was 7 guys in the group at the time, I think. And I just loved the experience to be able to share my experiences with this group of dedicated guys and to encourage them and really shepherd them. It's like you're a pastor. I felt like I was shepherding them in a lot of ways. And then there was a group of guys in England and Australia that struggled with same-sex attraction that couldn't find a group that would fit their time zones where it was good for them. So we saw a need for a group that could do that. And by this time I was retired. I had retired from work. So my schedule was very open and very fluid. So we put together a time that would really work with these guys in these other countries. And I had asked them about it and if they would be interested, and they were. So in April, we started a second group, and we have 2 guys in England. There were 2 guys in Australia, a couple guys in California, and then there were some guys in the Midwest. And it was interesting because literally I could truly say in that group, good morning, good afternoon, and good night, because it hit all of those times of the day with these guys. And so we've been going strong since April on that group. And so there's 6 guys that are active in that group. And then there was another group that I just took over last Monday, and it's at Monday mornings at 7 a.m. my time. And so they needed a permanent leader for that group. So I took over that group, and that's a non-SSA group. So I'm loving it. I feel like I am exactly in the center of God's will of what he's calling me to do and where he wants me to be. And it is all about redemption. It is all about second chances. It is all about the fact that you're not alone, that we've been there. We know what it's like, and you can change. So I feel passionate about it. Ultimately, it's sharing the gospel is all it is, and the power of God. So.
Well, Greg, thank you for taking the time today to share with us your story, to share with us what LiveFree has meant to you, what it's meant to get into small groups. And I'm so proud of you to hear that you are such a great leader of now 3 different, it sounds like, small groups, and what you're doing in the AA world, which is known as a 12-step and giving back to others. But your journey is one that will be motivational to all of our listeners. And we thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time this third Thursday and this wonderful evening. We hope that you've gotten as much as we've gotten out of this podcast. And we ask you to continue to look forward to Redeemed, look for our emails, sign up, and look for us on social media. We look forward to launching another great podcast on third Thursday of next month. Thank you very much. Godspeed.